Welcome to the Low Production, High Value Show with your host, Andrew Jenkins. On the show, we'll be exploring the world of entrepreneurship, social media, and the growing digital landscape. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, you know that the world of business is constantly evolving and changing. And in today's digital age, it is more important than ever to understand how social media and technology are affecting the way we do business. That's why on this show, we'll be talking to entrepreneurs and experts who have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with you. From the latest trends and technologies to the struggles and triumphs of running a business, we'll be covering it all. So if you're looking to level up your entrepreneurial game and become more digitally savvy, then let's get started with the Low Production, High Value Show.
Welcome to the latest episode of the show. And today I'm very, very pleased to have as a guest Martin Waxman. Welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. Great to be here. And I was waiting for you to invite me. No, just kidding.
Well, it finally happened. And that's not to say you can't come back. The door is always open. Well, let's jump into it. So, okay. I mean, you and I have known each other for a number of years. Came to know each other in the online world, in the social space, and then in real life. And I don't come from a communications background, but you do. But you've married that with the social and digital. So I'm curious, what do people get wrong when it comes to putting those two disciplines together?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One, communications professionals are a little bit, and I'm using this with a small c, more conservative or more cautious, let's say more cautious, than say our marketing counterparts. And so as a result, whenever there's anything new, like social and digital were, although some people treat them like they're still new, it's a whole other topic. Some communications people go, "Ooh, this is great." And others go, "Wait a minute. No, this is not the status quo. We need to step back, evaluate. I'm not sure about this." And I think what that results in is that communications gets left behind. And what happened was, in the early days, there were a lot of communications people who were very active, and we can name a whole bunch of them between us. And they stayed active, but it was very, very hard. I remember Joseph Thornley and I, this is probably in 2010, we were at a Canadian Public Relations Society conference presenting on social and digital media, and we were getting heckled from the back by some very well-known agency owners and leaders who I shall not name. We're saying, who cares? It's media.
What did it rhyme with?
Yeah. No. And that still shocked both of us and still shocks me today. And I think that's part of the problem. The fact that rather than saying, "Oh, something new, let's try it," and you don't want to jump in to the deep end without considering, "Oh, there's sharks there," or something. But that's a very much of a mixed metaphor, but let's go with that. But you still can't just go, "Nope, that's not what we do, so let's ignore it." You need to really figure out how you can test it, approach it in a scientific manner, similar to what you've done, and figure out how to make it work. And I think that's one of the big challenges for communications, especially now that we're coming into the era of generative AI.
Is it a bit of a double whammy? We're both Canadian. That Canadians tend to be, "No, you go first." And add to that the conservative nature or the cautiousness or the risk aversion of communications professionals. And then you get a bit of a double whammy.
Oh, yeah. I think that adds more to it because some of my U.S. colleagues were a bit farther ahead. Some weren't, but some were, and many of them started integrated agencies really before that time when they saw the value of digital. Hey, you know what? What I loved about it is it gave me a platform from which, I could step out of the shadows. I didn't have to be the PR person in the background. I could actually publish my ideas, my thoughts, or connect with people or talk to people. And to me, that's one of the best things about social media.
Was that, we've talked about it before, that I ask my students at the university what their social media moment was. Was that yours when you realized, oh, there's no impediment to me publishing for my own sake?
Yeah, I think so. There were two. That was one of them, like realizing that, and I've always been a writer at heart. So seeing that blogging is writing and publishing, getting that through my head, it's like, oh, it's not all the code necessarily, although you do have to make it look good, but it is
Mhm.
writing and publishing and a way, and in a way promoting, distributing it. So that was one. The second one was on Twitter. And I was on it, we were talking about this early, like in early 2007, but it took me about 18 months to get up the courage to tweet because I took the concept of followers too literally. I thought, followers, why is anyone following me? I don't like, rather than connections. And so until I got that through my head, I wasn't able to jump in and participate.
I tell people, and I may have shared this with you before, and I think I've mentioned it here on the show. My first tweet had a typo. My second tweet was an apology for the typo in the first tweet.
Very Canadian.
But then someone who was following me uh, tweeted back to me saying, "Just relax," and the rest is history. But to your point, like you were experiencing too, is that there was this, frankly, fear stemming from the unfamiliarity of it.
Yes.
Like, who are these people following me, and why are they following me? What else do they know about me? Besides what I tweet. Like, your guard is up, and then after a while, you just realize this is just free form conversation.
Yeah.
At least that's what it was then.
And that's the ideal. I mean, that's what the social part of social media is. And I think that's another thing that marketers and communications professionals get wrong. They think of it as promotional media, and it's not PM, it's SM, social. It's engaging. It's sure you have some promotions, but if every single thing you do is I did this and I'm doing that and I'm going here and it's like, okay, this is really boring.
When the joke about when Instagram is down, just tell me what you had for lunch.
Yeah. Well, that's
Well,
on Threads.
Yeah.
You start to see that.
Well, I remember going to PodCamp, and Matthew Ingram did a session, and he talked about at that time his experience that he was having at the Globe and Mail. For those listening who aren't familiar, the Globe and Mail is one of Canada's largest and longest standing newspapers. Anyway, he talked about how he was in the embracing digital camp, and then there was the legacy journal journalists that were like, we write the story, we publish the story. If some reader wants to engage us, they can do so through the letter to the editor, but we do not talk to them.
It's so funny. I was there too, and that really stood out for me. It's like, how arrogant.
Well, and he talked about how on his side, he's like, we write the story, but also, like, I think he gave an example later about Obama's visit to Canada, and that story could be updated hourly online, and the physical newspaper had no such luxury. So he was like, this is where we're going, and we can have a direct dialogue with our readers to know what they like, what they don't like. We can enter into debate, like where yes, maybe that they can get out of hand a little bit with what they like and don't like, but isn't this a good thing?
Yeah, I think it is. And he had a real uphill battle with the Globe, I remember. And it's funny, I feel like, and I'm still very much a Globe reader digitally, not in print anymore, although I used to love getting the print editions of, lots of different media, magazines, newspapers. But if you look at where the Globe is today and compare that, say, to the New York Times, which I think was maybe less resistant, you see what they've done in digital and social, and it's incredible. Like, they embraced podcasts, they embraced video. And now I heard someone last week. I was at a conference, and there was a person from the New York Times research and development team, former journalist, trained as a journalist, and they're testing out all these new, in quotations, products that they're coming out with, one of which is taking 2D photos at big sporting events, attaching that like a 100-meter dash or something like that, correlating where people are, when the photo was taken, to determine speed, and turning that into a 3D model of the race that they can analyze in near real time. Incredible. Like, and this is the gray lady, so to speak, all the news that's fit to print.
Well, they've become less of a newspaper, more of a media
They have.
player. Now, if you listen to Scott Galloway in the Pivot podcast, he talked about when he was on the board about their missed opportunity or the giving away to Google and so on. But now, because of their recalibration around digital, they are self-sustaining. Where I think it's Ben Smith was on a podcast recently talking about the fall of Vice News, the fall of BuzzFeed News, and he talked about this idea of everyone was trying to monetize the click, but the number of clicks available is infinite. And so it was a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
The value dissipated, became like air. I mean, we all need air to breathe, but nobody's paying for it. So
No, and it almost seems like the New York Times is trying to monetize subscribers. So listeners, subscriptions, sign-ups, to their newsletters and things like that. And that in a way makes more sense. It's so funny. That's the old model. Subscribe, get it delivered.
well, in my earlier presentations, I used to show a screenshot of the New York Times Twitter account saying they have more followers on Twitter than they do literal subscribers.
Yeah.
So is this not indicative of the sea change that we're experiencing? And it just, I'm curious, this example you gave about the running the Olympic race or whatever.
Yes.
It still speaks to this overarching mantra in the social space of content repurposing. And can I take one asset in one format? Can I turn it into something else for another channel? Or can I work smarter rather than harder? And someone shared a post on LinkedIn showing a video they created with Midjourney, and I'm forgetting the name of the other solution they used for another video rendering. Again, all with just a prompt.
Yes.
And it was mind-blowing. And we're not, I recognize this stuff was in beta probably for a few years, but for all intents and purposes, this stuff is less than a year old. And what they can do now is just only indicative of what the future holds, which is both good and scary.
It is. And, it's so funny because a year ago, none of us would have used the term prompt engineering. We say, tell it what, if you've used any of the generative AI platforms that were available, like Jasper AI, for example, or Hyperwrite, that were available pre-ChatGPT, they were more complex to use because you had to enter in different fields of data in order for it to process your request and give you something that was, in some cases, not bad. But, there were shortcuts built in when they were saying, who's your audience? Where's your website? You put this all in and it sliced and diced it. But now prompt engineering and learning how to do it properly, it's really learning how to speak to a machine or code, like we're coding in natural language, in English, for example. And we need to speak to machines differently than I think we need to speak to people, because we all make assumptions. We know each other, there's shortcuts and things. Machines,
Yeah.
so far, I'm sure they'll get better at this, but so far, they're not trained on our shortcuts. ChatGPT is trying to do that by getting us to program in certain things, who we are, our preferences, and that might help. But I think learning how to, or thinking about prompt engineering as coding with words is really important, because suddenly it's something we can understand. And in a way, it makes us dangerous, because any one of us can soon be a website developer, or any kind of app developer. We can create written content, we can create images, we'll be able to create and edit videos just by chatting with it. That's incredible when you think of it, that just by saying something, a machine can follow your directions.
It's funny how and I've been playing with it for a number of months now, and to your point, is like, so I have to err on the side of over communicating. So I can't, we can't speak in code. We can't use shorthand like we do with
Yes.
human collaborators that know us, know our thinking, our style, or whatever it might be. Is we have to help the likes of a Chat GPT in this case learn our shorthand, or to as help them become our second brain.
Yes.
Um, in previous conversations, the stance is it's not going to replace us, but uh, those that know how to use these sorts of tools may very well replace us. So the race it's an arms race to become, oh, okay, so you've got a musket? Well, I have an automatic rifle. Oh, okay, then the next person ups the game. All that to say, what are you through the course that you do for LinkedIn Learning and things like that, where are you guiding your audience and your students in terms of what they should be paying attention to related to generative AI and just the AI landscape?
Well, it's interesting because I recently did a course for LinkedIn called Generative AI for Digital Marketers. And what I tried to do is just provide an overview of what it is, how it works, and demystify it, because there's so much confusion about it. One, because most marketers and communications people and salespeople, for that matter, have absolutely no education in math. We don't know statistics, which is what underpins narrow AI algorithms. And when we think of artificial intelligence, a lot of us think about Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Terminator coming to our door. And that's so far from what it is now. Who knows what it's going to become? And that is something to worry about. But right now you need to deal with what it is. And so I think it's really important for everyone to try to educate yourself on just how it works, separate the hype from the promise,
Mm-hmm.
because there's so much hype out there, and also figure out, and this is where we have to use our judgments, which tools are going to be around and which aren't. Because if you go on all in on something, and lots of us found this out in the early days of social media, what was it? TweetPic, that little app that let you share your pictures, your photos on Twitter. Oh, and Twitter goes, nah, just embed them. Oh, okay, don't need that. So you need to
Bye.
pick and choose. You need to pick and choose, and keep your mind open, because what you're using today, I mean, we say Chat GPT, but there's no guarantee that it's going to be around in a year or 2 or 5 years. Odds are maybe better because it's got funding from Microsoft and it's being embedded in their products versus some of the other upstarts. So you have to keep your minds open and break the tools, I think, into what they can do. So there's all the text to text prompts, there's
Mm-hmm.
text to image prompts, and then what I like to call the text to create. Those are all the other ones. So where you're chatting to create a video, or to create a piece of music, or to create a piece or synthetic voice, or to create, critical path for a project. where you want to manage all the moving parts, and you're able to do that rather than by sitting filling everything in either in an app or an Excel spreadsheet, even for that matter. You can do that by just talking to it and iterating back and forth with a voice conversation.
Do you see, like you made your comment about TweetPic made me think about, I remember a company that we were partnered with when I was with a software company. They had an ad that was on CNN at the time, and this is the 90s. And someone called them up and said, "Is your internet better than my internet?" Totally misunderstanding, and it's completely understandable that they might
Yeah.
have because it was brand new territory. And I think about the early days of AOL and Prodigy and CompuServe, and
Yeah.
where we had these distinct sort of lanes of the internet. I could be on Prodigy, but as a Prodigy user, I couldn't talk to you on CompuServe and vice versa. Well, all that dissipated. And it makes me wonder about, as you're saying, well, there's no guarantee that some of these generative AI tools will survive. And I predominantly play with ChatGPT, but I've played with Bard and I've played with Claude 2.0.
Oh, that's so funny. Sorry, I'm going to stop you here because Americans call it Claude, but we call it Claude. We use the French pronunciation.
Well, and I have a friend
I do
who
too.
is French, and so it's like a habit. Is it process or process?
Yes, exactly.
Well, but so I played around it with all three, and I keep defaulting back to ChatGPT. Now, in fairness to all three, it may be that I haven't played to each of their respective strengths.
Right.
And so, Midjourney creates beautiful images, but the fact that you have to go through Discord and this convoluted conduit to access it and to use it, at least that's my early experience with it, I found that challenging. I just wanted a similar like Chat GPT like interface. But to your point, it's early days. I've played around with Midjourney and DALL-E and so on, and it's produced some interesting stuff, and it's also produced some like, ooh, that's ugly. Or
Yes.
I had use an AI tool to enhance my headshot, and it made me 50 pounds heavier and about 15 years older. No, I'm not using that. So yeah, it's there's still some work to be done.
There is, and I think in some ways we're expecting more than what some of the tools can currently give us because of the hype. And in other ways, I think I read about a study that was done recently with Wharton business students and ChatGPT to come up with creative ideas for something, and ChatGPT way outperformed the students. Now, question is, not every student at every single institution will rise to the top. Hopefully most of them do, but we're all people. The second thing is, when you take something like ChatGPT that can just produce content at a rate, that we can't compete with, and its volume is so much higher, is it a percentage of that volume that's good, or is it just by brute force? And again, is that what you want to compare to the way we think or our creativity? I don't know. I do like it as an assistant. I think that's a great way to think about it, to your point earlier.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Social media has become an imperative for almost every business. Discover how to successfully implement an effective social media strategy that is supported and integrated throughout every part of your organization with this essential book from our host, Andrew Jenkins. Social Media Marketing for Business, Scaling an Integrated Social Media Strategy Across Your Organization, is now available from Amazon or KoganPage.com.
Well, I gave a presentation about it in May, and I walked the audience through saying, here's the prompt that I used, and then I kept iterating. And I asked it I gave it the context. I run a social media agency. We wanted to do a content calendar or whatever. And it did 3 months worth of content. Now it didn't create the content. It just basically gave me the placeholder. Do a social post about Canada Day or Labor Day weekend or some national awareness day of some type or whatever. And so when you looked at the X percentage of posts, you realize, as you were describing just a moment ago, I won't use everything. But if it gave me 60% of my calendar as ideas that I didn't have to come up with instead of staring at a blank screen, well, you just made me more productive. Now, I still have to I describe it as, it gave me the skeleton. Now I have to put meat on the bone.
Yeah.
But it saved planning time, not creating time, planning time.
Yeah.
And a lot of people talk about that it's not going to replace the creatives. I used it to summarize a chapter of my book, then turn that into a presentation. But I still had to write the underlying chapter.
Yeah.
I wouldn't ask it to write a chapter of a book, because when I found, and maybe you found the same thing, anything of substantial length starts to feel less human, and it feels, I don't know, there's something about the nature of the writing style that you kind of go, you can almost tell, like, this is AI.
Yeah, it's for me, when it's longer, it's both generic and creepy, which is a weird combination.
Is there a category for that on the New York Times bestseller list?
There should be. In the best generic creepy novel. It's interesting. And you know what? Again, early days. Like, we're all still figuring out how and where to use it. And I think that's an important thing for marketers and communicators to figure out. Where does it fit in your workflow? And then what other skills do you need to make that fit? Because you can't just say, oh, we've got, a corporate subscription to ChatGPT. Great. It's through Microsoft Copilot, for example. So our data is safe. Let's use it. Okay. Where? How? What are the safeguards you're putting in? Who's going to be fact checking this stuff? Who's responsible for the output, at every single step of the way? Because it hallucinates. Yeah. And so that we have to step back and not be so overwhelmed by the, shininess of the tools, and just say, okay, this is great. Now let's figure out how it works.
It comes out, the expression I've heard and use often is, a fool with a tool is still a fool.
Yeah.
It is just a tool. Can it make us more productive? Absolutely. Would I rely completely on it? Am I going to outsource my entire workload to it? No. Even like Scott Galloway from the Pivot podcast talked about how he's in the midst of writing another book, and he's being transparent. He said, I am using it. Is it writing the book? No. I want to have it run another pass of a segment of the book to see, what if it was worded this way? So he's using it for some editorial options. It's reframing some perspectives. So it's almost like you can have a bit of a debate with it, or play with it for options. And the net of it is, ideally, that the recipient or the purchaser of the book is going to be better off.
Yeah.
But he still is the fundamental source of I'll call it the IP or the insights.
Yeah. And needs to be in order to hold a copyright. Can I shift the productivity discussion? Because it does make us more productive. I think one thing no one's talking about is it will also increase our unproductivity too, in a way. And I'm speaking personally here.
Interesting take.
Yeah. So you want to create an image. So you give it a prompt and it's not great. And you give it another prompt, and pretty soon you're having a lot of fun creating these bizarro images or worlds. Same thing. Say you are planning a personal event. You're thinking of themes for a party on work time. Well, now, so those are also things that I think companies will need to figure out as,
Well,
people
and
have
how to
access to
partition it, because to your point, if someone's planning their wedding at their desk using the corporate Chat GPT account,
what are they training it on? And you're a
why is this?
cybersecurity firm. Yikes.
Well, and I've played around with some of the image generation ones, and the way I describe it is, oh, so I gave it a scenario. I want an impressionist style. I want an image in the style of an impressionist painter of a man in a study by a window with sunshine, smoking a pipe with a typewriter.
Yeah.
And again, as we've been told, or thus far, the more specific, the better. But even then, it was sort of like a glitch in the matrix, because I was getting like pixelated. I was getting aspects of the image not fully formed. It almost looked like someone overlaid uh, like multiple images, so you had this just these distortions and so on. So, like, early days, the more specific you can be, the better. But um, would I trust it with my corporate brand for output? No. Can it help me be the second brain, do some heavy lifting? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But be careful, as you said, it could be a black hole that affects your productivity.
Well, the same way social media was, really. And companies were, I don't believe, right to say, okay, we're banning social media, say in 2007 or 8. Nobody can use it. But by the same token, if you said, okay, everyone get on social media, it's like, okay, I'm going to just.
Well, this is what, in the number of client engagements we've had this discussion about. Now, the pendulum has swung the other way. They want all of their employees to be sharing
Yeah.
stuff on their behalf, because and it's been championed by some of the employee advocacy solutions, that your collective employees' networks are far greater in terms
Yes.
of reach and engagement than your company page. But there's this dilemma of, well, your employee, and we'll use LinkedIn, your employee and LinkedIn are the ones that own their profile, not you.
Yeah.
So you can only encourage them. You can't expect them or order them or ask them. And so that's, can present a bit of a dilemma.
Yes.
And the other thing that we're seeing is, and I have to remind clients, is saying the issue is not them sharing content on their behalf. There may someday, hopefully never, be an issue where they did or said something on social or offline unrelated to your company, but made them look bad, and because of their affiliation with you,
Yeah.
you were pulled into the drama. And you know this one as well as I do. Has Justine landed yet? Trending hashtag from years ago,
Oh, yeah.
where someone posted a racist tweet about their impending vacation, and between the takeoff and landing, they became a world renowned phenomenon, and were fired in the process. And that had nothing to do with the company they worked for, but their employer was pulled into the
Yeah.
fray. But this is a fine line. To your point, it used to be, no, you can't have access to social. Now it's, by all means, have access to social. And by the way, can we exploit you for doing so as an employer? I mean, I'm being a bit facetious there, but companies can benefit
Yes.
from the influence and the relationships of their employees, but there has to be governance. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here. There has to be a particular approach to it. Before we leave generative AI and ChatGPT, I did want to ask, what are you most keenly interested in or paying attention to on the horizon as it's emerging?
I think it's really the prompt to create on the video front. I think that's really going to change things. Because when you think about video, and you have a film background,
That's right.
in your undergrad, as do I, film and TV. And you think of how difficult it was to create a film, say, on 16 millimeter or Super 8 even. I learned,
Did both.
learned to cut on those little teeny things
Mhm.
and all the different things you had to learn. Whereas here, all of a sudden, it's an idea or vision in your head, and hopefully you have a good one and a creative one, and are able to express it. And all of a sudden, you'll get this presumably finished product. I think it's really exciting. Again, I think that a person who is really good at visuals and video and, say, seeing the way a scene might play out in their mind, the way a director would,
Mhm.
will do better than someone, say, like me, who's more word focused. And so those specialties won't go away, but they're just going to evolve. And that's something I'm watching. How are
Well,
all these disciplines going to change?
you raise an interesting point because I think about, and I'm going to get sort of geek out here film wise. It's often been talked about in relation to Martin Scorsese, where sometimes when he's talking to actors or members of the crew, he will reference his encyclopedic knowledge of film. He'll say, "Do you remember the opening crane sequence in Touch of Evil or whatever it is?"
Yeah.
To get people on the same page of what he's envisioning. And so when you talk about this text to create, but in a video context, even though you and I have some degree of background in film and film theory and editing theory, etc., the barriers to entry are coming down. I don't have to necessarily know exactly editing technique. I can now train through prompt engineering to say, similar to scene XYZ of film ABC, create a blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
So now I can reference this vast, foreseeably vast library of knowledge related to film that whatever tool I'm prompting can draw upon and then render something similar. But that's the jumping off point.
Yeah.
And so, geez, where can they go with that?
Yeah, but you still need that knowledge, right? Because if you haven't seen the base material that you're referencing,
Yeah.
all you have is, well, let's have two people in a desert. Okay.
So is that Ishtar or Lawrence of Arabia?
Yeah, exactly. Great analogy, by the way, for doing a desert well and maybe not so well, although I have to say I did find Ishtar entertaining, but
Oh, there's a wardrobe of love in my eyes. Why don't you come in and see if there's something your size? One of my favorite lines.
yeah.
Sorry, folks, we're off on a tangent here.
Yes, we'll come back.
But when I think about, again, when I'm geeking out here, one of the most famous scenes in Lawrence of Arabia is the watering hole when Omar Sharif's character appears as a mirage on the horizon. And it goes on for an extended period of time. But to be one, I know it. It's one of my most revered films. Not one I create. I mean, I revere it, and David Lean, the director. But to describe that sort of that segment of the film, and to be able to prompt another solution to create something, man enters, on the horizon on a camel, mirage, like what, like, geez, I'm curious to see how far away are we from creating such
Oh, yeah, I don't know, but
product.
stay
We'll
tuned.
see where Stay tuned. Well, we touched on it, but I wanted to jump back to it. You've been similar to me, but you're instructing in a number of areas: LinkedIn Learning, Schulich, McMaster, and different types of students.
Yeah.
I'm assuming all working professionals to
Yes.
some degree,
Or trying to become working professionals.
right? And if you had to sort of give the spectrum of what they're trying to learn and where they're coming from, are they coming from marketing or communications, or are they trying to use the education as a pivot point to enter marketing or communications? And also, what are they trying to get out of it beyond that? I'll call it adding to their credentials. Is it digital? Is it social? Is it the marriage of those with comms?
Great question. It depends on the institution. I mean, for LinkedIn Learning, it's marketing with an underpinning of communications. For McMaster, it's more communications with an underpinning of marketing. And then at Schulich, I teach in the Master of Marketing program, and I teach digital marketing strategy. But I try to add a communications or a content lens, really, to that. So it's not just, oh, let's pay and see what we get. Let's think of our stories and start with, stories, content, and, become really great storytellers and connectors and relationship builders with our various audiences, customers, stakeholders, whatever you want to call them. And I think now generative AI has completely changed the way we do things. So I had a module or two on generative AI a year ago, pre-chat GPT, where I had students test out the tools, create a script, for example, for an ad, create an image, pop it into Lumen 5, say, and come up with a video, all in half an hour, 40 minutes. Now I have to integrate, I want to integrate generative AI into the various components of digital and social. But I think social's really become almost like a slice of the digital pie in many, many ways, because it's all digital. Honestly,
Yeah.
what are we doing that isn't?
Well, there's so much that there's a given now. Like, it used to be there was a lot of companies that didn't have a website. Well, now it is a given, or it is just like you're not in the game if you're
Yeah.
if you're not on, don't have a website. And now, even some semblance of a default presence online and social.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask specifically to LinkedIn Learning. Are people using LinkedIn Learning? I'll call it for a more of a moment in time, some task specific training.
I think that's some of it. Although what LinkedIn has done is they put together these learning pathways.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's what they call a master digital marketing pathway. And it includes, I think, 10 or 12 different courses that they've curated that fit together. And so one, you get the certificate for each course, but after the maybe 18, 20, 25 hours, 36 hours of learning that you would do, you hopefully will gain the skills you need to at least start working in a digital job in some area, whatever you decide to do, whether it's SEO or content or social. There's so many different areas to focus on.
I wanted to pick up on something you referenced just a moment ago about storytelling. And you and I, as alluded to before, both have a background in fine arts. And I have a degree in film production, and I tell people that every day, whether consciously or unconsciously, I'm drawing upon that learning. And so sadly, so storytelling is a bit of an overused buzzword.
Yes.
But I mean, to me, the underlying principles still apply. But I'm curious to know from your perspective, what do you draw upon from your finance background, and how do you apply it from we want to say storytelling, but more from a standpoint of messaging,
Yeah.
communication, copywriting, or your blogging even?
I had no idea at the time that I would take this path.
Me neither.
The path I envisioned was,
Social didn't exist,
yeah,
right?
what was different. And I find, like you, it's something that is so useful to me, because I understood, when I started working on video production, say in the early 2000s for clients, I could actually talk to the video production company, say, no, we want to do this, we want to do that. No, let's change this around, rather than being led by them. I could, come up with, okay, here's our client's objective. How do we do this? And be there in the editing and say, oh, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? I think it's really helped shape my approach. In a way, what I think social media has done is we're all in showbiz, at least a little, or faux biz, if you want to say. It's not really, but
Well, that's certainly happened with influencers as
yeah,
they become members of SAG-AFTRA.
yeah. And so we need to know how to use the various outlets, the various types of media that we have, whether it's social, digital, traditional, to catch the attention of the people we're trying to reach. And how do you do that? Well, if you just say, here's a pen, it's really good, buy it. Well, maybe that's so boring that people might think it was hilarious. Or maybe they just go, get away from me. So how do we do that? Well, we have to borrow the techniques of film and literature, really. It's something that some of the great copywriters have always done. If you look back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and DDB, Bill Bernbach, they've always done that. And I think that's really important. So for younger people who are starting out, don't just go into digital, open up your mind with the arts too, and the fine arts.
Well, I've saved it. I have to go back to it. There was an article about prompt engineering, but what we can learn from philosophers,
Yeah.
to aid our prompt engineering. And I was just struck by this again, this reframing, drawing from I have a keen interest in innovation, and oftentimes when there's a problem presented, the solution to the problem comes from a discipline outside of the area that's having the problem. And I won't get into the weeds there, but let's look to philosophy for writing a better prompt, because one, it's going to expand its training and its learning.
And it's logical. It's a logical argument. So you're presenting what you want in hopefully a logical way.
I would be remiss if we didn't talk about crisis communications.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, from your perspective, is especially in the social digital world, is social and digital playing a role where it makes a crisis worse because it can amplify quickly, or does it play a role for fixing a situation because it can get I'll call it the correct message out quickly, or is it it is one of the situations where it depends? It can be both your friend and your foe.
Yes, to all three.
No. Okay, that's it for today, folks.
Yeah. No, I think ultimately it comes down to the people behind the crisis who are responsible either for it or for managing it or for solving it or for apologizing. And you need to be empathetic. You always needed to be empathetic, but before you didn't have to, you need to be able to deal with it in real time publicly. That's a difference. That's something social made communications people, have to pay attention to. That's a good thing, because all of this means that hopefully you're being more transparent. You're being more transparent. You're being more honest. If you're showing empathy, maybe you can start rebuilding the trust that you lost and the reputation that you lost by doing something stupid. So many crises happen. I mean, there's some that happen because of, it's a bomb goes off, or there's a catastrophic weather event, something beyond your control. So there are crises like that. There are slow burning crises. So any union management negotiation has a potential for becoming that, because it goes on for a long, long, long time. Lots of opportunities to resolve it, but for whatever reason, one side or the other, or in some cases both, they just go nope, and then all of a sudden, boom, you have a crisis on your hands. But a lot of the crises are caused by us and our stupidity. If this was Family Feud, the number one cause of a crisis is stuff we say and
it's
do.
companies stepping on a rake, right?
Yeah.
Well, Bob Iger comes to mind from his billionaire summer camp remarks, and how you look at the role social is playing for the writers and the actors. Social's on their side,
Yeah.
and the corporations, try as they might, well, and then also to your point about transparency, people look to the traditional media like, say, ABC News, which is owned by Disney. Are they going to report the unvarnished situation? People are skeptical.
Yeah. And
But
in the case of, say, the writers and actors, here you have some of the most talented creators available and a platform that where they can say anything. And if they're honest and truthful, I mean, again, who are you going to believe?
plays to their strengths.
Yeah.
The have you seen, though, in the number of years that you've been in this space, I'm sure there's still a ways to go, but are corporations recognizing the need or the requirement to be more transparent, be willing to be accountable?
I think many are. And many approach crisis communications, issues management and crisis communications from what Melissa Agnes, who I think you may have met or seen, she's a reputation consultant. She talks about crisis readiness. So you don't
Yeah,
only have
I think I reference her in my. I think it's her that's referenced in my course at U of T.
Yeah, she's great, and she talks about crisis readiness, which is different than having a plan. A plan's something that's in the drawer. It's like, oh, trouble, pull it out, dust it off, open it up. She talks about, it's like running a marathon. You constantly need to be training. You need to be figuring out, what potential scenarios could happen. What are your risks? And this goes beyond just marketing and communications. This goes to talking to your operations team, talking to your legal team, talking to finance. Like, you need to know what's going on and have those lines of communications open. And then training for it, doing crisis training on a regular basis so that if or when something happens, at least you're ready. It won't be perfect, but at least you're not starting from behind the starting line.
I had a friend who worked for ING Bank, and they were going to announce that it was being acquired by Scotia.
Yeah.
Scotiabank. And for those listening who are unfamiliar, so one of Canada's big five banks was going to acquire this outlier bank whose reputation was built on, we're not like the other banks. And so they actually put together sort of a virtual war room to do scenario planning to say, what kind of questions and comments can we anticipate that we will get from our customer base who came to us because they wanted the kind of service they could get from a bank that wasn't like the others, and now we were going to become part of what they were trying to avoid. And so they did scenario planning. They had put together some some prepared remarks and things like that. But to your point, they weren't pulling out some outdated sheet out of a drawer and dusting it off to say this is what we do, because they had never been in that scenario before.
Yeah. And so you have to plan for it. And, this is where generative AI can help you as well. So I listen to Lex Friedman podcast. Those great 3-hour long episodes. And one of the things that Lex Friedman always talks about is he uses generative AI to summarize the different perspectives in a complex situation. Suddenly, if you're trying to plan for a crisis, you can say, okay, these people think in one way, think about the world this way. Someone else thinks about it or looks at it another way, and maybe there are allies. Maybe these people are, not as open or maybe even more hostile towards us. How would they perceive something like this? And suddenly that's a great jumping off point to be able to plan too.
and each side is justified in their
Yeah.
perspective.
So, but you need to
And
understand them in order
yeah,
to be able to start to build bridges.
well, we have to have a separate conversation about Lex Friedman's style. He's the most low key podcast
No
host I've
kidding.
ever listened to.
But you listen to it for 3 hours.
Yeah, and that's the path that he's taken. Well, and just in the little bit of time we have remaining, building on the whole crisis management and crisis comms conversation, I couldn't let you go without asking for your take on Twitter and its rebrand to X and the execution thereof. And if you were advising Elon Musk, what what advice would you have given, or would you give now?
Well, honestly, I think any advice I or pretty much anyone else would give him, he would just ignore.
Yeah,
But I might say,
insert Linda Yaccarino.
yeah, on one hand, I don't mind that he's trying to blow it up a little bit because it wasn't working before he acquired it. It was a little spammy, a little too commercial. I wasn't getting the conversations I wanted. I wasn't seeing them. They were happening, but you'd see them infrequently. And so I think he's right to blow it up. I don't know if he's blowing it up in the right way. It's chaos. And honestly, I never thought I'd say this, but I don't know if Twitter's going to be around or if it's going to be around in the way that it started in the next 6 months, a year and a half, because there comes a point where people just go, okay, I've had enough. The idea of a rebrand, okay, companies rebrand, they change their name, but this was so over the top in some ways and not taking into account all of our attachment to Twitter and tweets and our history with it and all of our emotions with it. We were talking about this earlier. It was your favorite platform. It was always my number one platform. I never, ever, ever thought there would be a time where I wouldn't be on it multiple times a day. Like, I'm going there. Now it's like, okay, I got to go look at Twitter because I have to for work. I need to. I want to, or part of me wants to. But I go there and I shake my head and go, what's going on? Paid, I get the subscriptions, but now all I'm seeing is people who pay. And I'm not necessarily interested in all of those people. I'm interested in some of the other people who I'm connected to. And
Well, I paid, and it was supposed to give you a better Twitter experience. Well, I haven't seen that. And then now he's saying he's going to charge. You have to have a blue check. You have to advertise if you want a blue check, or vice versa. And you can't use TweetDeck, which I like, but you can't use TweetDeck unless you're a blue check subscriber. And like, how many times do people have to tell them the blue check is not your salvation from a revenue point of view? But I want to get your take on this. I mean, you and I are both nostalgic about the days of old on Twitter and how great it was. And I mean, frankly, if it weren't for Twitter, I don't know if we would ever met
right.
way back when. And my digital network in the Toronto area and globally blew up because of Twitter. But one of the things I think is that's overlooked, it's oversized influence as a platform, but what people I think to gloss over is its utility.
Yeah.
I was just having a recent interview for the show. Talked about Arab Spring, news breaking about the attack on the Bin Laden compound. The plane crashing in the Hudson broke on Twitter.
Yeah.
Just the simple things like there's a power outage due to a tornado, or there's a power line down in such and such a neighborhood because of a rainstorm. Those seem mundane or simplistic, but we forget how much we relied on Twitter for those sorts of things.
Yeah. And I think the idea of it being the source of news or real-time news, I think it's a very powerful idea still that you don't really get on any of the other platforms. Maybe Threads will do it, maybe not. It's too early to tell. But I don't know. I hope Elon Musk figures it out, and I hope it just isn't a super app Because if it is a super app, I don't know if I need another super app. Harry McCracken in Fast Company wrote a column on that saying, WeChat really popular in China because, the government controls who can do what there. Whereas here, he said, we already have super apps. If you've got an iPhone or an Android device, Google and Apple have given you that opportunity. You have all the apps you want in one place, easily accessible, and they all work together.
You have choice. And I've always found that in this case of a super app, not every feature and function is going to work so well that you wouldn't seek an alternative.
Plus, Elon Musk has to give me a really good reason to trust him with my money.
Yes.
And I don't have that yet.
He's too shoot from the hip.
Yeah,
But
things he does are incredible, really, when you think about Tesla, when you think about
but
Starlink.
that relates to hardware. That's
Yeah.
the problem.
Right.
I'm with you. He's Tesla, SpaceX, genius. But this is a new arena that he seems to be floundering and making rash decisions. But the conversation I was having recently about Threads, and it was someone who had worked in media with Reuters and CNN and the like, and said, I tried to do sort of real-time updates like we were accustomed to on Twitter, and Threads isn't there yet. It doesn't have the same algorithm or pacing. It bogs down. Now, who knows what the future holds, but there's some work to be done for Threads to be a true Twitter threat. I don't know if you've been playing on Blue Sky, or I'm still on the waiting list, but I've played with Post News.
Yeah, I'm still on the waiting list for Blue Sky. I think they may have missed their opportunity. That the fact that they haven't opened it up yet, people are just going to get tired of it. Post News, I've tried, the network factor, it's not there. And the one thing that Zuckerberg had going for him, or has going for him, is everybody's on Facebook, whether you're using it or not. And by extension, Instagram. And if it's suddenly you're able to transfer that, might not be the right network for that platform, but you got a base.
Yeah, it's already proven out with 100 million people. Not everyone remained active, but still, it was a great way to launch another one.
Yeah.
So, I kudos to Mr. Zuckerberg for that.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to thank you so much for your time. I really, really enjoyed this. Now that we've solved the world's problems related to social media, we can go back to our respective daily activities.
Exactly. Great talking to you. Thank you so much for asking me. And it's been really fun to catch up, and hopefully we'll catch up in person one of these days soon.
Very much so. And I'm sure we'll do it again, because I'm sure there'll be other topics and as generative AI matures and Threads becomes more commonplace, or
more interwoven.
Or maybe there'll be somewhere out of left field there'll be another solution. So only time will tell. But thanks again.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Low Production High Value Show. Be sure to give us a rating and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out Volterra at volterradigital.com to learn more about how they can support your social media marketing.